Titanic is a name everyone has heard of, right? The massive ship that sank in 1912 and plunged into the depths of the ocean is not only a symbol of one of the greatest disasters in history, but also one of the most tragic events ever recorded. But do the legends and movies surrounding Titanic's sinking actually reflect the truth? In this video, we'll dive into how the Titanic sank, the mistakes that led to its downfall, and the hidden truths behind the tragedy. The ship was celebrated for its grandeur, but the tragedy behind it is much more complicated, filled with surprising errors that you may not expect. Get ready, because the story of the Titanic's demise is far more intricate, much deeper, and filled with astonishing mistakes than you might have thought. Titanic's sinking wasn't isolated to just this one ship. It was part of a larger construction project, which included two other ships, the Olympic and the Britannic. The first ship, Olympic, was built based on Titanic's design and served as a sort of test ship. However, after experiencing a few accidents and technical problems, Olympic provided valuable lessons for the Titanic's construction. Still, Titanic was built so ambitiously that many believed nothing could ever go wrong with it. The Britannic, on the other hand, was repurposed as a hospital ship during World War I and also met its own fate. While the Britannic did sink, it was fortunate enough to be evacuated before the situation became as catastrophic as Titanic's disaster. Knowing about Titanic and its sister ships helps to understand how events unfolded and the risks involved in this massive shipbuilding project. The story of the iceberg that sank Titanic is as fascinating as the ship itself. In 1912, as Titanic sailed through the ocean, it encountered an iceberg that had started its journey thousands of years earlier. This massive chunk of ice had broken off from the Arctic and had been drifting southward, surviving in the cold waters before it finally collided with the Titanic. The iceberg's journey across the ocean wasn't just a coincidence. It was the result of a series of errors, decisions, and, unfortunately, bad timing. Titanic's sinking can be explained by three major mistakes, which were not just coincidences, but rather the result of human error and poor judgment. The first mistake was the grand staircases. Titanic was the largest and most luxurious ship of its time. But instead of prioritizing the safety of passengers, too much focus was placed on its aesthetics. The grand staircases were an iconic feature, but they were more about luxury and visual appeal than about practicality. These grand staircases actually made it more difficult for passengers to evacuate quickly in an emergency. The second mistake was the lack of lifeboats, or more precisely, the decision to keep lifeboats to a minimum because they were seen as ugly. The designers of Titanic didn't want the lifeboats to detract from the ship's luxurious look, so they kept the number of boats too low. Not only that, the crew was ill-prepared to manage the evacuation, which meant that even when lifeboats were available, many were launched with too few people on board, contributing to a much greater loss of life. The third major mistake was using steel that was too early in its development. Titanic was labeled unsinkable, but the truth was that the steel used to construct the ship was very brittle at low temperatures. The steel used in Titanic's hull was incredibly strong, but when it collided with the iceberg, the cold temperature made it more prone to breaking. This flaw in material science led to the catastrophic damage that caused Titanic to sink. These mistakes could have been prevented. The sinking of Titanic wasn't just a massive engineering failure, it was also the result of human factors and cultural norms of the time. The Titanic's journey happened at a time when safety standards weren't as developed as they are today. With just a few changes, better planning, different decisions, this tragedy might have been avoided. Captain John Smith, Titanic's captain, played a significant role in the disaster. Contrary to popular belief, his reputation as a hero isn't entirely accurate. Captain Smith was highly confident and had a long career, but he made some incredibly risky decisions that contributed to the disaster. The ship's speed, particularly, was an issue. Smith pushed the ship to its limits, wanting to make headlines and set a new record. But in doing so, he ignored warnings about icebergs and the dangers ahead, leading to the ship's eventual disaster. Another significant mistake was the missing binoculars. It might sound trivial, but not having binoculars on board was one of the critical errors. The lack of binoculars in the ship's lookout station prevented the crew from seeing the iceberg earlier, which would have given them more time to react and avoid the collision. This small but important detail played a major role in the disaster. The Titanic's encounter with the iceberg was not a random event. It was the result of a fatal combination of factors. As the ship sailed at high speed through icy waters, it was essentially a ticking time bomb. The lack of proper lookout, the failure to slow down, and the inadequate response once the iceberg was spotted all contributed to the disastrous outcome. One of the most tragic and unforgettable aspects of Titanic's sinking was the orchestra that continued playing music as the ship went down. The musicians played on, trying to keep the passengers calm during the final moments. Their dedication to their craft and their courage during such a terrifying situation has become part of Titanic's legend. Titanic's sinking was marked by another mistake that had fatal consequences. As the ship was sinking, there was a delay in the decision-making process about how to abandon ship. Many passengers hesitated or were confused about what to do, and valuable time was lost. After Titanic sank, the world changed forever. The disaster led to major changes in maritime law, including stricter regulations for the number of lifeboats, better training for crews, and improvements in ship construction. The tragedy of Titanic became a turning point in the safety standards of ocean travel. Titanic wasn't just a disaster, it became one of the greatest lessons in history. The sinking of the Titanic highlighted the importance of safety, communication, engineering, and the consequences of human error. The aftermath of this tragedy led to changes that affect maritime safety even today. The story of Titanic is a reminder that no matter how advanced technology becomes, we must never stop learning from our mistakes to avoid repeating them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.